So, welcome to the first part in our Introduction to Python series. And I'm just going to kind of cover some very basic uh, introduction. It's going to be a very basic introduction into Python. If this is your first time learning how to code, Python is by far one of the more easier languages to learn. So, definitely stick around for this series if you want to learn more about programming or just the Python language. And if you aren't new to coding and Python's maybe not your first language that you've learned, C++ or JavaScript, then you're going to definitely see a lot of similarities between that language and what you're going to learn during this Python course. So for the first kind of episode in our Introduction to Python series, I thought it'd be best to just kind of cover the intro to what is Python. So kind of going over like the language, it is more of what's considered a high level general purpose language. And that kind of just means that a lot of the computer memory based, the kind of nitty gritty stuff that exists under the hood, you don't really ever have to touch. A lot of implementation is kind of easily given to you by the language itself, which is one of the reasons that Python is considered to be a high level language. Um, it's definitely an easier language to learn because of its English-like syntax. Many people believe that it's easier to just, when they want to pseudocode or just come up with code, but in English language, they end up kind of writing it in Python because Python already as a language is very similar to how you or I might even speak. Python, if you were curious to, well, why is it called Python? It actually comes from the Monty Python comedian group. If you've ever seen certain movies like Monty Python and the Holy Grail and others like that, you definitely know where this kind of comes from. And Python is also a language that is capable of object-oriented and procedural programming. So if you definitely go down the route of implementing more object-oriented programming, Python does support it. So why use Python? Or what is it even used for? So it's definitely used in many different fields, such as mathematics or machine learning, which is that kind of word that you hear trending, especially in today's world. Uh, Python is definitely a language that's used for such developments. It's definitely a great language because of its simplicity. You can focus more on the actual implementation of whatever project you might have in mind. So learning syntactically how to code using Python isn't usually a big hurdle just because of how simplistic it is, and it makes it great for a lot of uses. Plus, a lot of Python has open source libraries and things like that, so that the community that surrounds Python, there's definitely a lot of people who are contributing different pieces of code that you can then use in your own code ultimately kind of give you a stepping stone for whatever project or endeavors that you might have in mind. Um, but sadly, there are some downsides to Python. So we kind of covered a bunch of the great things that makes Python such a popular language, but obviously not all this good stuff comes without its cons. So Python kind of gives up some of its simplicity in terms of getting its simplicity and flexibility. It trades that off in terms of memory and time. Again, since you don't really handle a lot of the nitty gritty under the hood, and there's a lot of things that you do that kind of handle it already for you, it's very easy to kind of misuse a lot of memory, excessively use memory, and obviously amp up operation time as well. So ultimately, though Python does make programming in itself actually comes to um, programming and actual implementation of your code, it might use more memory or take longer to execute than maybe in other languages like C or C++. But ultimately, a lot of the times with just the RAM and memory that is available in computer systems today, that impact these cons that I mentioned of memory and operation time are usually never that noticeable, just because again of the hardware developments that we've made in today's modern computers. So I'm going to be kind of covering some more stuff of Python and kind of just understanding a little bit more of how do you actually code in Python. Now, kind of before we even can do that, we kind of need to install Python. So one thing that I think that is useful for using is installing Python and using Anaconda's navigator. So if you go to this website, https://docs.anaconda.com/anaconda/installs/, you'll see different systems that you can make sure to install. I'm using Windows, so I'm going to install on Windows. The first step will be to click the download the individual edition. And so obviously this will take some time, so I'm going to try to fast forward to when it's done. Cool. So once you have Anaconda done installing, you can open it. Opening. All right. So you're just going to want to hit next. I agree. Just me for right now on my desktop. Just going to hit install. All right. So then we can just go ahead and hit next, next, and finish. So it's going to ask you to register if you don't already have an account. It's going to ask you to fill in some personal information. So now you should be able to have the Anaconda Navigator app. So you're going to want to open that. It might take just a tad bit of time, but once it's opened, you should see a screen just like this. So the thing that we're going to actually be using for this particular series is that we're going to actually be using the Jupyter Notebook to kind of write most of our code. It's nice because you can kind of execute it and see it almost right away. So one thing that we might want to do is that we're just going to create a new notebook. And we're going to go ahead program in here. So to kind of make sure that everything's working, we're going to just type print, two parentheses, hello. So this is sort of your trademark line of code that most people write whenever they install like a new editor or whatnot, just kind of make sure that everything's working. So we can go to cell, run cells, and here we can see that we successfully printed hello world. So this is going to be our kind of first line of code starting into the series, and if you followed along typing this alongside me, this is indeed going to be the first line of code in your Python journey.